Hello friends, welcome aboard the Sleepy Fairy Tale Express. I'm the Red Mermaid. This train is a dream journey to fairy tale land. Have you all got your train tickets? Subscribe and hit the like button to always be able to ride. Close your eyes, prick up your ears, and listen in a comfortable position. Today's story is Gulliver's Travels. Hello. My name is Gulliver. I'm a doctor who is always filled with curiosity and wonder about the world. Since I was young, I've loved reading books, especially travelogues and adventure stories. One side of my room is covered with world maps and nautical charts. Every time I looked at the wall, my heart would race as I imagined the various countries and their cultures. After graduating from medical school, I worked in several hospitals, but there was always a desire for adventure lingering in my heart. The everyday monotony I felt on my way to work each morning only fueled my longing for travel. I enjoyed meeting new people and listening to their stories. I often imagined how many fascinating stories are hidden in this world. So, I finally made up my mind. I need to see and experience more of the world. I decided. That's how my adventure began. Let me tell you about the amazing adventures I experienced. Sit back for a moment and listen closely. One day, I was walking near the harbor. The wind was blowing strongly, making my hair flutter, and the smell of the sea tickled my nose, filling me with excitement. The harbor was always busy and lively. Merchants were loading goods, and sailors were shouting while checking their ships. Suddenly, a man approached me. He was tall and robust, with a face marked by the signs of long voyages. His eyes were sharp yet friendly. "Dr. Gulliver, I've heard you're an excellent physician. Would you like to be the doctor on our ship?" he asked. His voice was strong and firm like the salt of the sea, yet it also felt warm. I was surprised by his offer, but filled with excitement at the same time. I immediately sensed that this was the opportunity to embark on the adventure I had always dreamed of. "Yes, I would be happy to," I replied without hesitation. My heart was already sailing on the sea. The thought of traveling to various parts of the world on a big ship thrilled me beyond measure. His name was Captain Maiden. He told me about the ship we would be sailing on. It was a large sailing ship with powerful sails, built to withstand the storms of the sea. Listening to his description, my heart pounded with excitement. I returned home and immediately started packing my bags. The excitement I felt while preparing for the adventure was indescribable. I packed old maps, a compass, thick clothes, medicines, and essential medical books. There were also new equipment I had never used before, such as a small telescope for use during the voyage and a notebook for recording the weather. I also prepared emergency food and water, just in case. As I packed my travel bag, I imagined the situations in which each item would be needed. Spreading out the old map, I felt a rush of excitement imagining the navigation routes. The long-held desire for adventure was becoming a reality. The night before departure, I looked out the window at the moonlit sea. The moonlight seemed to create a silver path, leading me to new adventures. In one corner of my room, there were several books on the shelf. I chose a few to take with me. Books about famous navigators' records and fascinating creatures discovered in new lands inspired me greatly. I believed the knowledge gained from these books would be helpful in my upcoming adventure. After packing everything, I felt much lighter. It seemed I was truly ready to set off. A journey is always filled with unexpected events. The night before departure, I couldn't sleep, staring out the window and lost in thought. The night sky was filled with countless stars, and the gentle sound of waves came from the sea. The sound seemed to be calling me. The moonlight created a silver path on the sea, as if it was leading me to new adventures. My room was organized with all the items prepared for the journey. Imagining the situations in which each item would be needed while packing, my room was soon filled with travel preparations. Old maps, a compass, thick clothes, medicines, and essential medical books, all these were prepared for my new journey. I knew that traveling wasn't just about visiting new places. It meant confronting the unknown, with no one knowing what might happen there. So I made a promise to myself, no matter what situation arose, I would not be afraid and would face it bravely. Feeling much lighter after making this decision, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining various scenarios. Giant sea creatures, mysterious islands, encounters with strangers, everything excited me. But at the same time, I felt a slight fear. I wondered if I could handle all of it. Nevertheless, I decided to trust myself. Our ship encountered a massive storm in the middle of the sea. Several weeks after setting sail, the sky began to darken. Storm clouds gathered, the wind grew stronger, and the waves rose higher. The captain and crew hurriedly prepared for the storm. They lowered the sails and checked every corner of the ship. Seeing their tense expressions, I realized the situation was serious. Boom! Crash! Lightning struck, and thunder roared loudly. Rain poured down in torrents, and huge waves crashed towards the ship. The ship rocked like a small toy boat. The crew shouted, unable to hear each other over the commotion. The captain ordered everyone to take cover inside the ship. But the waves were so strong that it was difficult to move properly. I knelt with others inside the ship, praying. It felt like the ship might capsize or break apart. At that moment, I heard the captain shout, "The ship is breaking! Everyone, take cover!" I was filled with fear, but I gathered my resolve to survive. The ship tilted more and more, and water poured inside. At that moment, I was swept away by a massive wave and plunged into the sea. The cold water engulfed my entire body, making it hard to breathe. The waves tossed me around, and I lost my sense of direction. Gasping and struggling, I managed to get my head above water to breathe, but another wave crashed over me. Flailing in the water, I thought this might be the end. But I couldn't give up. I summoned my strength and kept swimming. The sea was filled with enormous waves, and the surroundings were pitch black. Rain pelted my face, and waves kept crashing over me, but I never stopped. My arms and legs felt heavy with each stroke, but I kept pushing forward, driven by the will to survive. The salty seawater stung my throat, and my body grew more and more exhausted. Far away, I saw a faint outline of an island. The island appeared before me like an oasis. There! I have to get there, my desperate inner voice shouted. I used my last remaining strength to head towards the island. The waves tossed and pulled me, but I managed to get closer to the island. As the island drew nearer, my heart became more and more urgent. As the island became clearer, my hope grew. It was a beautiful sight, filled with palm trees and lush plants. The seawater was clear and transparent, with small fish visible in the water. But I had no time to appreciate it. I swam desperately to survive. My body felt heavy with water, but I didn't give up. The current was still strong, and every breath stung with salt water entering my nose and mouth. My arms and legs felt like they weighed a ton, but all I could think about was reaching the island. The seawater was cold, and the waves kept crashing over me. But the closer I got to the island, the more desperate I felt. I could see the outlines of trees clearly, and the palm leaves swaying in the wind. I paddled harder and finally reached the shallow waters. Finally, I set foot on the sandy shore. The warm sand felt incredibly comforting. After being tossed around in the cold water for so long, my body finally felt a sense of stability. But I was too exhausted to fully appreciate it. I collapsed right there. My body went limp, soaked with seawater. The salt stung my skin, and the sand felt rough against my skin. I panted for breath, but even breathing was hard. Water and sand mixed, clinging to my clothes and skin, which felt raw from the salt. My head was spinning, and my muscles trembled painfully. Though I could barely move, I was grateful to be alive. My vision blurred, and my heart still pounded rapidly. The sound of the waves echoed in my ears, and the wind felt cool yet chilly. The sky was filled with stars, twinkling as if to comfort me. I had no choice but to rest. Thus, I lay on the sand and drifted into a deep sleep. I lay on the sand and fell into a deep sleep. My body, entangled with the sea salt and sand, felt cold and heavy, but exhaustion overcame me, and I slept. The sea breeze kept brushing my face, and the sound of the waves became faint in my ears. The breeze was cool and chilly, cooling my wet body. The sky was full of stars. They seemed to comfort me, twinkling in the night. But I was too tired to appreciate them. In my deep sleep, I felt the sea and waves in my dreams. I dreamed of struggling in the water, my body trembling as if in response. In my dreams, I was still fighting the sea, continuously struggling to survive. Amidst this, distant music and the whisper of leaves carried by the wind seemed to soothe me. And this was the beginning of my grand adventure. Waking up on the sandy beach, I still felt like I was in a dream. The sky was still dark, with stars slowly fading as the morning sunlight began to paint the world. The sea made gentle, soothing sounds as waves lapped against the shore. I tried to get up, but my muscles screamed in protest. However, I persevered and slowly got to my feet. Looking around, the island was more beautiful than I had imagined. Tall palm trees and tropical plants grew lushly, and a long stretch of beach lay ahead. I took a deep breath, and the fresh air cleared my mind. My clothes, soaked with seawater, clung uncomfortably to my body, but the coolness was refreshing. I decided to explore the island. Walking along the shore, I saw small shells and seaweed scattered about, and tiny fish swimming between the rocks. As I ventured further, I entered a forest. The forest was dense with tall trees and vines, and colorful birds chirped from all directions. With each step, I grew more curious about the secrets this place held. I had no idea how long I had been walking since I reached the island. When I came to my senses, I found myself deep in the forest, far from the sandy beach. The forest was filled with dense trees and vines, and sunlight barely filtered through the leaves. The air was fresh and clear, filled with the scent of various flowers and plants. The rustling of leaves and chirping of birds were delightful to my ears. I walked slowly, looking around. The trees were tall and lush, and some had unique shapes I had never seen before. The tree trunks were covered with moss and vines, and the ground was soft with grass and fallen leaves, making each step careful. The forest exuded a mysterious atmosphere, and I wondered what kind of creatures lived there. As I walked through the forest, I came across a small stream. The water was clear and cool, and I took a break there. Dipping my hands into the water, the cold sensation refreshed me, and I took a few sips to quench my thirst. Various plants grew by the stream, and I could see small fish swimming. For a moment, I felt at peace in this place. Where am I? I muttered to myself. Looking around, the forest grew deeper and darker. The trees were taller and thicker, and the sunlight barely penetrated the leaves. The forest was quiet, yet filled with the sounds of various creatures. The distant chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind surrounded me. It felt like the forest was whispering to me. Fatigue overwhelmed me, and I couldn't take another step. I lay down under a large tree. The tree was very tall, with branches spreading wide, creating a natural canopy. The ground beneath the tree was covered with soft moss, making it a comfortable place to rest. I lay down and looked up at the sky through the leaves, taking deep breaths. The leaves swayed in the wind, and occasional sunlight warmed my face, reassuring me. Exhaustion made my eyelids heavy. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep sleep, enveloped by the sounds of the forest. As I drifted off, the scent and sounds of the forest surrounded me. The rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant chirping of birds, and the nearby movements of small animals felt like a lullaby. I fell into a deep sleep in the embrace of nature. Until I woke up, I was completely unaware of anything. The events of the world, where I was, what might happen. At that moment, I was just too exhausted and could only sleep. In a deep, deep sleep, I lost the boundary between reality and dreams. In my dreams, the battle at sea and the exploration of the mysterious island continued. I encountered waves and strange creatures in vivid detail, almost as if it were real. The large tree that sheltered me felt like a giant guardian. Its branches spread wide, covering the sky, and its leaves rustled in the wind as if singing a lullaby. The moss-covered ground relieved my body's fatigue, and the forest scent calmed my mind. Even in my dreams, I felt protected by the tree, and the peaceful atmosphere of the forest made me feel at ease. In my deep sleep, I continued to adventure. I fought giant sea creatures, explored unknown islands, and met new friends. The dreams were so vivid that I didn't want to wake up. But my body was still tired, and my muscles were tense. Even in deep sleep, my body felt the fatigue of the adventure. When I woke up, I couldn't believe what I saw. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't budge. My arms and legs were tightly bound, wrapped in strange materials. The cords were intricately woven and tied so tightly that it was impossible to break free. In a panic, I looked around. Surrounding me were tiny people, each only as tall as my finger, dressed in strange attire. Their clothes were adorned with various colors and decorations, and they carried small spears and bows. Their faces showed a mix of caution and fear. As soon as they saw I was awake, they began to move frantically. Some ran quickly and returned with more people. I watched in confusion as their numbers grew. I couldn't understand the situation. The tiny people surrounded me, issuing commands in their language. Their voices were small and sharp, yet lively like music. They didn't seem to want to harm me, but I couldn't understand why they had tied me up. I tried to speak to them, but my voice was weak. I managed to croak out, "Help! I mean no harm." But they didn't seem to understand. They only whispered among themselves, becoming more cautious. Their language was foreign to me, but within it, I sensed their fear and curiosity. Looking around, I saw the tiny people surrounding me. They held small spears and bows, watching me with wary eyes. Their clothes were elaborate and colorful, each adorned with different patterns and decorations. Their faces showed a mix of tension and curiosity, their eyes sharp yet full of wonder. They were only about 15 centimeters tall. Despite their small stature, they moved with great coordination. Some stood guard around me while others worked to tighten the ropes binding me. It seemed they had never seen anyone like me before. Their language was short and sharp, and their voices sounded lively as they gave commands to each other. I wanted to talk to them, but I feared my voice would be too loud and scare them. So, I spoke as gently and softly as I could. "Hello. I mean no harm. Please help me." But they didn't understand. Their reaction was to become even more cautious, tightening the ropes further. At that moment, one of them brought forward someone who appeared larger than the others. This person seemed to be their leader. His clothes were more ornate, and he carried himself with authority. He scrutinized me closely before gesturing commands. As soon as he gave his orders, the others moved quickly to carry them out. I watched, hoping they wouldn't harm me. "Hello?" I tried to speak carefully. But my voice was too loud for them, and they retreated in surprise. I tried to speak as gently as possible, but they didn't seem to understand. They whispered among themselves, watching me with tense expressions. Hoping to show that I meant no harm, I slowly raised my hand in a peaceful gesture. Their reaction was very cautious. Some still pointed their spears at me, but others observed me with curious eyes. Their clothes were intricately made, with each piece displaying different colors and patterns. They communicated with small gestures and signals, watching my every move. One of them approached and slowly touched my hand. His hand was small and warm. He seemed to realize I meant no harm and looked at me intently, speaking softly. His voice was melodic and gentle. Although I couldn't understand his words, I could sense kindness in his eyes. I nodded at him and slowly smiled. A small smile spread across his face, and he gestured to the others. Only then did the others lower their guard and come closer to me. They surrounded me, their eyes filled with curiosity. I was afraid of how they would treat me, but at the same time, I was eager to learn about their world. It was then that I realized I had arrived in an unbelievable world. The people on this island were much smaller than I was. It felt as though I had entered a miniature world. Their houses and buildings were all tiny and intricately designed. I was curious about how their world could be so small and yet so perfectly maintained. Their village was filled with small houses made of wood and stone, and the paths were neatly organized. Everything was delicate and beautiful. The tiny people cautiously examined me. They circled around me, their eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and fear. I tried to act as carefully as possible so as not to scare them. I slowly raised my hand in greeting, but they still didn't let their guard down. Their language was unfamiliar to me, but I could sense their tension and curiosity within it. I decided to give them time to approach me. One of them, who looked very small and fragile but had a determined look in his eyes, gathered the courage to come closer. He cautiously touched my hand and gave me a small smile. His hand was warm and soft. I gently smiled back at him and extended my hand further to invite him to come closer. Seeing his actions, the others began to approach slowly, surrounding me. They touched my hair and examined my clothes. I felt reassured, sensing they meant no harm. They were not trying to hurt me, but were merely curious about this giant creature they had never seen before. They carefully examined me, realizing I wasn't a threat. At that moment, I became even more curious about this tiny world and its people. They continued to observe and discuss among themselves. Their language was rhythmic and soft, and their gestures were delicate and precise. I looked around their village more closely. Their houses were like toys, small and meticulously crafted. The houses made of wood and stone looked sturdy despite their size. Each house had a garden filled with colorful flowers and small trees, and the paths were neatly maintained. The tiny villagers moved about busily, greeting each other as they went. Their way of life was very organized and orderly. They cultivated crops, carried water, and built houses with their small hands. Everyone fulfilled their roles diligently, cooperating to live together. I admired how peaceful and harmonious their society was. Despite their small size, they helped each other, creating a close-knit community. I was also fascinated by their tools and machines. They made and used various tools from wood and metal. Small hammers, saws, shovels, and hoes, all crafted with precision. I wondered how they managed to make and use such tiny tools. Their craftsmanship and skills were remarkable. They eagerly explained their culture to me whenever I showed interest. Even though we couldn't communicate directly due to the language barrier, they used gestures and drawings to explain. I realized how kind and curious they were. Their warm hospitality was a great comfort to me. So, I set foot in the miniature world of Lilliput. My adventures here were just beginning. I was incredibly curious about the stories I would encounter. My first meeting with these tiny people taught me a lot. Although they were small, their world was very complex and intricate. They guided me to their village. The village was filled with small, charming houses, each with a beautiful garden. Their homes were meticulously crafted from wood and stone, and the paths were clean and tidy. At the center of the village was a large square, surrounded by markets and shops. People were bustling about, buying and selling goods. As I explored the market, I saw various shops selling all kinds of items. Food, clothing, tools, jewelry, all small and finely made. I marveled at their craftsmanship and skills. They showed me different items, explaining their uses, and I appreciated their kindness. In the market, I also had the chance to taste their food. Small fruits, bread, meat, all tiny but delicious. The tiny people cautiously, yet determinedly, led me to their king. In their world, I was a colossal giant. The king stood up and commanded, "Release this mountain-sized man." His voice was small but authoritative. The king was dressed in splendid clothes, with a small crown shining on his head. The king's robe was embroidered with gold thread, combining red and gold. His throne was small and intricate, surrounded by kneeling courtiers. The king looked at me and gestured with his hand, ordering the tiny soldiers to untie the cords binding me. They moved cautiously but skillfully. The king approached and examined me. His eyes were filled with curiosity and awe. I slowly rose and bowed respectfully to the king. He observed my actions, and a small smile spread across his face. He spoke to me, "Great stranger, what is your name?" His voice was gentle and kind. "My name is Gulliver, Your Majesty," I replied as politely as possible. I worried whether he would understand my words, but he nodded, seemingly comprehending. The king gestured for me to follow, and I walked behind him. His courtiers and soldiers watched me with both curiosity and caution. The king led me to a section of the palace, and we entered a grand hall. Though small, it was beautifully decorated, with ornate decorations hanging on the walls. I bowed respectfully to the king and, with a choked voice, said, "Your Majesty, please give me something to eat. I'm starving." The king opened his eyes wide and looked at me, carefully examining my condition. His gaze was cautious, but kind. He sensed the seriousness of my request and gestured to his courtiers. "Oh, I see. Very well. Bring food immediately," he commanded with authority. The courtiers hurried to carry out his orders. They quickly began preparing food with their small hands. I was amazed by their skilled movements. The king spoke to me again. "Gulliver, your journey must have been arduous. Please rest here for a while." His voice was soft and kind. I nodded and thanked him for his words. Slowly, the courtiers brought food before me. Although the food was too small for me, I was touched by their sincerity. On the small table were various foods, small bread, fruits, pieces of meat, and various drinks. Their food was small and finely made, and the aroma was very inviting. Carefully, I picked up a small piece of bread and took a bite. The bread was soft and tasty. The fruit was sweet, and the meat was tender. Their food satisfied my hunger, and I was deeply grateful for their kindness. The tiny people busily brought food to me. They served the food on small, delicate plates. Small bread, fruit, pieces of meat, and various drinks were presented. Although the food was too small for me, I was deeply moved by their sincerity. I carefully picked up a small piece of bread and took a bite. The bread was soft and fresh. Their fruit was fragrant and sweet, and the meat was tender and delicious. The various drinks seemed to be made in their traditional way, with a special taste. I slowly ate the food, deeply appreciating their kindness. The tiny people watched my reaction, smiling with relief whenever I showed satisfaction. To show my gratitude, I slowly bowed my head to them. They observed me closely, making sure I had everything I needed. They continued to bring me various foods, and I tasted everything they offered, appreciating their effort. Their craftsmanship and cooking skills were truly impressive. Although the food portions were small, their love and dedication made them sufficient. I wanted to repay their kindness, but I felt heavy-hearted, realizing there was nothing I could do immediately. They stayed by my side until I finished eating, rejoicing whenever I smiled with contentment. They provided me with a warm blanket and a comfortable place to rest, allowing me to relax for a while. Their care and warm hospitality were a great comfort to me, and I felt deeply grateful for their kindness. One day, the king came to me with a request. His face was serious, but his eyes remained kind. He called me out to the garden, and we walked through the beautiful palace garden together. The garden was filled with various flowers and trees, with small birds chirping, creating a peaceful atmosphere. The king sighed deeply and began to speak. "Mountain-sized man, our country is currently at war with the neighboring country of Blefuscu. They threaten our freedom. Will you help us?" His voice was quiet, but it carried desperation and urgency. I listened to his words, feeling the gravity of the situation. I couldn't forget the kindness the tiny people had shown me. I was deeply grateful for their hospitality and care, and I couldn't refuse their request. After thinking for a moment, I made up my mind. "Yes, Your Majesty. I will do my best to help." The king's face lit up with a smile of relief. The king explained the war situation and detailed information about the enemy. He told me about the geography and strategic locations of the Lilliput Kingdom and the threats posed by Blefuscu. As I listened, I realized how dire the situation was for this tiny nation. Despite their small size, they were bravely fighting. The king led me to the military camp, where preparations for the war were in full swing. The camp was bustling with tiny soldiers training vigorously. They held spears and shields, their eyes filled with determination. I was deeply moved by their courage and resolve. They initially looked surprised at my presence, but after the king explained, they showed me great respect. As I ventured out to sea, the enemy spotted me and began shooting arrows. The tiny arrows felt like mere tickles to me. Amidst the rolling waves, I watched the enemy ships, which looked like toy boats to me. Tiny soldiers on the ships were shooting arrows at me, but they merely bounced off my body. I realized they posed no threat to me. Carefully, I waded into the sea. The water reached my waist as I slowly approached the enemy ships. The enemy soldiers, shocked by my approach, began retreating. I heard their tiny voices shouting commands. Despite their best efforts to stop me, I easily overpowered them. I grabbed the foremost enemy ship. It shook in my hand like a paper boat. Handling it gently to avoid breaking it, I held the ship above water. The soldiers on board were terrified, their tiny eyes wide with fear. I gestured to show I meant no harm and carefully set the ship back on the water. Next, I took out a large rope and started tying the enemy ships together. As the small boats became interconnected, the soldiers panicked even more. I hooked a large grappling hook onto the end of the rope and lifted all the ships at once. The interconnected ships swayed on the water, and I began towing them back to Lilliput. Despite being overwhelmed by my strength, the enemy continued to resist. They threw tiny arrows and spears, but they were no threat to me. Ignoring their resistance, I towed the ships back to the shores of Lilliput. The Lilliputian soldiers cheered as I returned. They celebrated my victory and welcomed me as a hero. Witnessing this, the king and the people were astonished. To them, my strength was nothing short of a miracle. The king, overjoyed, bestowed upon me a great reward. His eyes reflected respect and gratitude. He invited me to a grand banquet hall where a celebration was held in my honor. The banquet hall was beautifully decorated, adorned with colorful flags and flowers. Long tables were laden with various foods and drinks. The tiny people cheered and welcomed me, surrounding me and waving their hands. I was deeply touched by their warm reception. At the banquet, the king presented me with a grand reward, a small medal made of gold. The medal bore the emblem of the kingdom of Lilliput and the king's personal signature. I accepted the medal with deep gratitude. The tiny people cheered and applauded. The celebration continued late into the night. Music played, and people danced, enjoying the festivities. I joined in the dancing, listened to their songs, and shared in the joy. They introduced me to their culture, and I gained a deeper understanding of their lives. However, not all the courtiers were pleased with me. Some began to feel jealous. They expressed their discontent to the king. "Your Majesty, the giant consumes so much food that our people are going hungry," they complained, their voices filled with anxiety and resentment. They envied the favor I received from the king. At first, the king ignored their complaints, but the discontent grew louder over time. They argued that my presence was causing problems for the kingdom of Lilliput. "Your Majesty, Gulliver is too large. He consumes too many of our resources," they insisted. Their voices grew more insistent, believing that my continued stay was a threat to the kingdom's safety and prosperity. Hearing their complaints, I felt a heavy heart. I wanted to help the Lilliputians, but the thought that my presence was a burden saddened me. I tried to explain my position to the king, but the situation had already become complicated. I pondered what I should do to resolve their grievances. The king called me to sit beside him. His face was marked with deep concern. "Gulliver, you have been a great help to us, but some courtiers are unhappy with you. Please understand their concerns," he said kindly, though I could sense his difficulty. I sincerely apologized to the king. "Your Majesty, I only wanted to help this kingdom. If I am causing problems, I will leave." The king sighed deeply at my words. He tried to persuade me to stay, but I worried that continued discontent might disrupt the kingdom's peace. Thus, I faced my first major challenge, friendship, and even jealousy on the island of Lilliput. My adventures in this tiny world taught me much. While I built friendships with the Lilliputians, I also had to confront their discontent and jealousy. Despite their small stature, they had great hearts. The courtiers' jealousy gradually made me feel more isolated. They watched my every move with suspicion. I tried to eat less and occupy as little space as possible to mitigate their complaints. However, no matter how hard I tried, their grievances persisted. They felt that my very existence was a burden. I wanted to maintain my friendships with them, but I also didn't want to disturb their peace. So, I told the king that I was preparing to leave. The king respected my decision, though his eyes were filled with sadness. The king made one final request, to help end the war with Blefuscu and bring peace to his kingdom. I accepted his request and decided to fight one last battle for the kingdom of Lilliput. The king bestowed a great reward upon me for my remarkable achievements. He praised me in front of the public, acknowledging my contributions. Gulliver is a hero who saved our kingdom. His strength and courage are an inspiration to us all. While the king's praise delighted me, it also sparked discontent among some courtiers. The king presented me with a medal adorned with gold and jewels. The medal bore the emblem of the kingdom of Lilliput and was of great value. The people cheered and applauded, but I could see jealousy and resentment on the faces of some courtiers. They envied the king's favor towards me and believed that my presence was causing trouble in the kingdom. That evening, I was invited to a banquet at the palace. The banquet hall was lavishly decorated, and the tables were laden with various foods. Music played, and people enjoyed themselves. Although I celebrated with them, a sense of unease lingered in my heart. The courtiers' jealousy and resentment weighed heavily on me. After the banquet, I moved to a quiet room with the king. He expressed his heartfelt gratitude and spoke of the future of Lilliput. He told me how much my help meant to them and that he hoped to continue working with me. His words were comforting, but I also felt the pressure to address the courtiers' discontent. One day, a great fire broke out in the newly built castle. Smoke rose high into the sky, and the little people cried out for help. The flames quickly engulfed the wooden structures of the castle, and the people were in a state of panic. They desperately tried to save their families and friends trapped inside, but the fire was too fierce. Seeing the smoke, I rushed to the castle. The situation was dire. Flames shot up into the sky, and the heat was intense. The little people were trying to extinguish the fire with small buckets of water, but their efforts were insufficient. Determined to help, I looked around and spotted a large river nearby. I quickly ran to the river and found a way to carry water. I used large leaves to create an improvised water container. Layering the leaves, I made a large water pouch and filled it with river water. Then, I hurried back to the castle and started pouring the water on the flames. However, it was not enough. The fire continued to spread, and I knew I had to take more drastic measures. To quickly extinguish the fire, I decided to use another method. I ran to a large grassy field and relieved myself, thinking that my urine would be sufficient to douse the flames. I positioned myself near the castle and directed the stream towards the fire. The flames sizzled and quickly died down. The little people were astounded by my actions. Although my actions saved the castle, they provided new fodder for my detractors among the courtiers. They rushed to the king, shouting, "Your Majesty, the giant has urinated on the castle. His actions are an affront to us." Their voices were filled with outrage and disbelief. I understood their reaction but felt distressed that my intentions were misunderstood. The king tried to understand the essence of my actions, but the courtiers' anger did not subside easily. They accused me of disrespecting their traditions and culture. "Your Majesty, his actions are unacceptable. He must be punished." The courtiers' demands put the king in a difficult position. He called me to explain the situation. Kneeling before the king, I sincerely apologized. "Your Majesty, I did my best to save the castle. It was the only way to extinguish the flames quickly. I meant no disrespect." My voice was earnest, and the king nodded in understanding. However, the courtiers remained dissatisfied. They continued to criticize me, arguing that my presence posed a danger to the kingdom. "He is too large. His every action is a threat to us. Your Majesty, we must expel him from this country." The courtiers' demands grew louder, and the king was deeply troubled. He tried to balance my contributions with the courtiers' discontent, but the situation was becoming increasingly complex. As the dissatisfaction with my actions grew, I ultimately decided to leave Lilliput. The friendships I had forged with the little people and the memories of helping them were deeply cherished, but I understood that their discontent was threatening the kingdom's peace. I went to the palace for a final conversation with the king. The king looked sorrowful upon hearing my decision. "Gulliver, you have been a great help to us. But I cannot ignore the courtiers' complaints. I do not want to lose you, but I respect your decision for the sake of peace." His voice carried deep sadness and gratitude. I bowed, thanking him for his understanding and support. I prepared to leave Lilliput and headed to the shore. The little people gathered upon hearing the news of my departure. They bid me farewell with tears in their eyes. "Gulliver, you are our hero. Please do not forget us." Their voices were filled with sorrow and gratitude. I embraced them, promising to remember their courage and kindness. I set sail on a small boat, venturing into the vast sea. The ocean was still immense and intimidating, but I was ready for new adventures. However, journeys rarely go as planned. Out at sea, I soon encountered another massive storm. The sky darkened suddenly, with enormous clouds gathering, and the wind began to blow fiercely. The waves grew higher, and my boat rocked like a small leaf. Clinging to the boat, I struggled to maintain balance as the waves grew stronger. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the storm threatened to engulf me. Despite my fear, I held on, determined to survive. But the storm was too powerful. The enormous waves overturned the boat, and I was plunged into the cold sea. Underwater, I lost my sense of direction, tossed about by the currents. Water entered my nose and mouth, making it hard to breathe, but I managed to resurface. Gasping for air, I swam desperately, but the waves kept pushing me back. In that moment, I saw a faint light in the distance. Summoning my last bit of strength, I swam towards the light. My body was heavy, and my muscles ached, but I could not give up. The light grew closer, and finally, I reached a rock, losing consciousness as I hit it. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on an unfamiliar island. My body was still wet from the sea, and my muscles were sore. But I was alive. Looking around, I saw a landscape unlike any I had seen before. The trees were enormous and lush, with leaves that were large and deep green. Exotic flowers in a rainbow of colors bloomed everywhere, filling the air with a sweet fragrance. Slowly getting up, I surveyed my surroundings. The sea gently lapped against the shore, and the air was fresh and clean. The sky was clear, and the sun shone warmly. Though I did not know where I was, I sensed that a new adventure awaited. This island felt entirely different from Lilliput. I took off my shoes and walked along the sandy beach. The sand was soft and warm. Deciding to explore further, I ventured into the forest. The trees stood like giant pillars reaching for the sky, with light filtering through the leaves, creating a magical atmosphere. Birds chirped among the branches, and various animals appeared and disappeared into the foliage. Observing their movements, I appreciated the island's rich biodiversity. As I wandered through the forest, I encountered numerous fascinating creatures. Butterflies with large, vibrant wings fluttered by, and small animals cautiously watched me before darting away. Respecting their habitat, I moved carefully. The forest enveloped me in its living embrace, and I felt a profound sense of peace. After traversing the forest and climbing a hill, I witnessed a remarkable sight. Beyond the hill lay a village inhabited by giants. In contrast to the Lilliputians, these people were much larger than me. Their houses were enormous and grand, constructed of wood and stone, towering towards the sky. Surrounding the houses were vast gardens and fences. I was awestruck by this new world. The village was bustling with activity. The giants moved about busily, each engaged in their tasks. They harvested crops, tended to livestock, and children played with enormous balls. Watching their daily lives, I marveled at their organized and orderly lifestyle. They were industrious and cooperative, which left a strong impression on me. Cautiously, I approached their village. The giants were initially startled and wary of me, but once they realized I posed no threat, they gradually approached and began speaking to me. Their voices were deep and resonant, and their language was unfamiliar. However, they used gestures and expressions to communicate with me. I tried to explain my name and where I came from. Although they did not fully understand my words, they recognized from my gestures and expressions that I was a friend. They invited me into their village, and I was grateful for their warm hospitality. They offered me food and water, which, though unfamiliar, tasted delicious. One of the giant's daughters was particularly kind to me. She invited me into her home with great care. Her house was enormous and beautiful, with large windows and high ceilings adorned with intricate decorations. The walls were adorned with beautiful paintings, and the floors were covered with soft carpets. The furniture, made of wood and metal, was impressively large and finely crafted. Her name was Glumbleclitch, and she was exceptionally kind and warm-hearted. Glumbleclitch seated me in a small, box-like room and offered me various foods. Her touch was gentle and meticulous. She placed small portions of food on a plate for me, making it easier for me to eat. The food was unfamiliar, but very delicious. There were small pieces of bread, fruits, meat, and various vegetables. As I savored their food, I began to understand their culture and traditions. Glumbleclitch explained their culture to me. She showed me their traditional clothing and explained the significance of each garment. She also demonstrated the tools and machines they used. They crafted various tools from wood and metal, showcasing remarkable skill and creativity. I was impressed by their craftsmanship and ingenuity. Glumbleclitch also made efforts to teach me their language. Using simple words and sentences, she explained their language to me. Her kind demeanor and warm smile were comforting. I tried to communicate with her, repeating her words and gradually learning their language. Thanks to her patience and enthusiasm, I quickly grasped their language. Glumblclitch introduced me to other giants. They were initially cautious, but after hearing Glumblclitch's explanations, they became curious about me. Their reactions varied. Some looked at me with wonder, while others still harbored a bit of fear. Despite this, most of them welcomed me. I participated in their daily activities, gaining a deeper understanding of their way of life. Their lives were highly organized and regimented. They worked tirelessly, harvesting crops, tending to livestock, cutting down trees, and building homes. Through assisting them in their daily labor, I learned how cooperative and supportive their society was. The giants assigned me various tasks. Despite my small size, they recognized that I could help. Using small tools, I learned to harvest crops and care for livestock. Their fields stretched endlessly, and their livestock seemed mountainous to me. Nevertheless, they entrusted me with small tasks, acknowledging my abilities. I learned a great deal from their teachings and gradually became accustomed to their way of life. In the process, I made many friends on their farms. They were initially astonished by my small stature, but my enthusiasm and efforts earned their respect. Working alongside them, I learned their songs and traditional dances. They taught me about their culture, and I made an effort to understand them. I spent my first days in the land of giants enjoying my time with new friends. Their curiosity and kindness provided great comfort, and I delighted in spending time with them. Their world was a mysterious and fascinating experience for me. Despite my small stature, they welcomed me warmly, and I grew closer to them each day. On the first day, I explored their village with Glumblclitch. The village was made up of enormous buildings and wide streets. Their architecture was intricate and beautiful, and everything was colossal. Observing their homes, I marveled at how large these beings were. Glumblclitch took me to the market, which was bustling with activity. People were busily buying and selling various goods. The market was filled with vibrant colors and scents. Fruits, vegetables, meat, clothes, tools, and other items were displayed in abundance. Their fruits seemed enormous to me, and I experienced new flavors as I tasted their food. They offered me a variety of dishes, and I was deeply grateful for their kindness. Their food was fresh and delicious, and their cooking methods intrigued me. That evening, Glumblclitch's family invited me to dinner. The table was enormous, and the food was plentiful. They provided me with small, delicate dishes and utensils, and I enjoyed their food while conversing with them. They explained their culture and traditions, and I learned a great deal from their stories. Their way of life and values deeply impressed me. Glumblclitch and I grew closer over time. She was both a friend and a guardian to me, always ensuring my safety and comfort. She crafted a small bed and chair for me and meticulously prepared everything I needed. Her touch was always gentle and careful, respecting my small size and treating me with utmost care. Every morning, Glumbleclitch taught me new words and sentences. Her patience and dedication allowed me to quickly learn their language. We spent time together reading books and sharing stories. She explained their history and traditions, and I learned a lot from her tales. Her eyes always radiated warmth, and her smile provided great comfort. One day, Glumbleclitch took me to a vast field filled with various flowers. Butterflies fluttered around, creating a beautiful scene. We spent time there, enjoying the natural beauty. She explained the different types of flowers in the field, and I learned a lot about their botany from her descriptions. Glumbleclitch also taught me their traditional songs and dances. She crafted a small instrument for me, and we sang and danced together, enjoying the music. Her voice was soft and lovely, and her dance was graceful and lively. I cherished the time spent with her, and our friendship became very meaningful to me. Life in the land of giants was a new challenge for me. Everything was too big and too heavy. Initially, everything was intimidating and unfamiliar, but I gradually adapted. I did my best to adjust to their way of life. They taught me many things, and I learned a lot from their guidance. The giants included me in their daily activities. I helped harvest their enormous crops and learned to take care of their livestock. Their fields stretched endlessly, and their livestock seemed mountainous to me. However, they entrusted me with small tasks, acknowledging my abilities. I learned a great deal from their teachings and gradually became more comfortable with their way of life. One day, they proposed a new challenge for me. They took me to a vast forest. The forest felt like a small world of its own. The trees reached high into the sky, and various animals lived among them. They encouraged me to explore the forest. Guided by them, I ventured into the woods. In the forest, I learned a lot. They explained the various plants and animals to me. I gained a deeper understanding of their ecosystem from their explanations. They taught me how to gather plants and care for animals. I learned a great deal from their teachings and understood how to protect their ecosystem. Living in the land of giants, I faced various challenges. One such challenge occurred one night. I was deep in sleep when I was awakened by a loud, clattering noise. Though it was pitch dark, I cautiously searched for the source of the noise. As I approached the source of the sound, I came face to face with a rat larger than a big dog. The rat glared at me, and I was momentarily paralyzed with fear. Realizing I couldn't run away, I made a decision. I had a small knife in my hand and gripped it tightly, preparing to confront the rat. The rat bared its sharp teeth and lunged at me. Summoning my courage, I swung the knife, inflicting a deep wound on the rat's body. It let out a painful screech and retreated, but quickly charged at me again. I continued to fend off its attacks with the knife. The battle was intense, and I sustained multiple injuries, but I did not give up. Finally, the rat collapsed from exhaustion, and I emerged victorious. After the battle, I was covered in blood. My wounds stung, and fatigue overwhelmed me, but I felt relieved to have survived. My courageous act soon became known throughout the land of giants, and I gained fame as the little person who fought and defeated a rat. My bravery deeply impressed the giants, and they respected me even more. People came from far and wide to see me. They were amazed by my small stature and bravery, regarding me with admiration. "Oh, look at that tiny person eating, talking, and even wielding a knife." Their curiosity and respect provided great comfort to me. My courageous act soon spread throughout the land of giants. Despite my small size, the giants marveled at my bravery in fighting and defeating the rat. They traveled from far and wide to see me. My name was now on everyone's lips. One time, a public event was held in a large village square. Giants gathered, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect. I shared my story there, reenacting the scene with my small knife. The giants applauded and cheered, supporting me wholeheartedly. The vast square was filled with various tents and booths. Everywhere, there were different foods and games. I stood on a small stage among them. People pushed and jostled to get a closer look at me. My every move was a source of fascination for them. When I drew my small knife, the giants held their breath. Slowly, I swung the knife, vividly reenacting the battle with the rat. I narrated how I had defended myself and defeated the giant rat. The people were amazed at my bravery and determination, applauding loudly. "Wow! How could someone so small be so brave?" voices exclaimed from all around. In this way, I became a celebrity in the land of giants. My adventures and battles made me a special figure in this enormous world. The giants took me across the country as a spectacle. At large markets and festivals, people marveled at me and exchanged stories. The market was lined with enormous tents, and various foods and items were sold. Huge fruits, meat, bread, and all sorts of handicrafts were displayed. I stood on a small platform among them, sharing my stories. The giants found my small gestures and mannerisms fascinating, paying close attention to my tales. Once, a child approached me and asked, "Gulliver, what is your home like?" I sat down to meet his eye level and told him about my home and family. The child's eyes were filled with curiosity and admiration. "I wish we had small people like you in our country," he said, and I smiled at his words. Children's interest never waned. They surrounded me, asking endless questions. "What does your world look like? Have you fought big animals there too?" I answered their questions sincerely, sharing my adventures. They imagined a small world different from their own through my stories, and they enjoyed it. Adults were also amazed by me. They admired my courage and wisdom, asking me to share more stories. I recounted my experiences in Lilliput and the friendships I made with the little people. They listened intently, learning much from my tales, and came to respect me. My stories soon reached the royal court of the giants. "Bring the dwarf who fought the rat to the palace immediately," the king commanded. I was invited to the palace, where I displayed my courage before the king and queen. The palace was truly magnificent. Its enormous walls, lavish decorations, and beautiful gardens were awe-inspiring. The palace interior was filled with golden furniture and murals, an unparalleled display of grandeur and luxury. The king and queen welcomed me warmly and showed great interest in my stories. "So, you are the little hero," the king said. I bowed respectfully and shared my adventures. The king and queen praised my bravery and wisdom, offering me to stay at the palace. They provided me with various comforts, ensuring I felt at ease. Life in the palace was luxurious and comfortable. I stayed in a large room, and everything I needed was provided. The royal chefs prepared special meals for me, and the servants cleaned and looked after my small room. I lived comfortably there and made new friends. The king showed great interest when he heard about my sailing experience. "You sailed a boat?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I can even row." Hearing this, the king ordered a model ship to be made for me. The courtiers prepared a large water tank in the palace garden and floated the model ship on it. The enormous palace garden had a large lake. Surrounded by beautiful flowers and trees, the water was clear and pristine. Following the king's orders, artisans meticulously crafted a model ship and set it afloat on the lake. The ship was small but sturdy, perfectly sized for me. I boarded the model ship, and the king and courtiers watched as I rowed. On the gently rippling lake, I rowed the ship, initially a bit wobbly but soon gaining confidence. The king and courtiers clapped and enjoyed watching my efforts. The king often wanted to see me sail the ship. Thus, I regularly demonstrated my rowing skills on the lake. The royal guests were also delighted by my performances. "It's amazing! How can someone so small sail a boat so well?" the king exclaimed. The king and courtiers praised my skill and showed great interest in me. One day, an important guest visited the royal palace. The king had specially arranged an event to showcase my rowing skills. Many people gathered around the lake, eagerly anticipating my demonstration. I got on the model boat and began to row, gliding smoothly over the water. The crowd was impressed by my skill and applauded enthusiastically. Living in the land of giants was a significant challenge for me. At first, everything was daunting and unfamiliar, but gradually, I began to adapt to their way of life. The enormous buildings, massive furniture, and the gigantic tools they used were not easy to get used to. However, with Glumbleclitch's help, I slowly adjusted to this new world. Every morning, I would wake up in the palace. The enormous bed was too big for me, but Glumbleclitch had arranged a small bed and blankets for me. The bed was made of soft fabric and feathers, making it very comfortable. After waking up, I would have breakfast with Glumbleclitch. She would serve my food on small plates, and I would enjoy the meal. Breakfast usually consisted of fresh fruit, bread, and milk. The fruit was incredibly large for me, but Glumbleclitch would cut it into small pieces. After breakfast, we would take a walk in the palace garden. The garden was full of beautiful flowers and trees, and birds chirped merrily. I felt at peace there. In the center of the garden was a large fountain, and the sound of the flowing water was soothing. Glumbleclitch explained the various plants and flowers in the garden to me, telling me their names, benefits, and how to care for them. After our walk, we would visit the palace library. The library was filled with giant books. The books were too large for me to read on my own, so Glumbleclitch would open them for me and help me read. I learned a lot of knowledge and stories there. The library had books on science, history, literature, and more. I was particularly interested in adventure stories and travel journals. Those stories inspired me greatly and fueled my curiosity. Life in the land of giants continued to bring new challenges and dangers. One of the most significant dangers I faced was when I fell into a mole hole. The mole hole was like a giant trap to me. I was walking when I suddenly fell into the hole and struggled to get out. My leg was stuck deep, and it was hard to free myself. Glumbleclitch heard my screams and came running to rescue me. She carefully pulled me out, and I was able to escape the hole. It was a truly frightening experience. Another dangerous experience was the sudden hailstorm. To the giants, the hail was just small ice pellets, but to me, it felt like giant stones. The sky darkened suddenly, and hail began to pour down. I couldn't find shelter in time and had to run while being hit by the hail. Each hit felt like a huge impact, and my body was covered in bruises. Fortunately, the palace servants found me and brought me to safety. They wrapped me in warm blankets and treated my injuries. I was deeply grateful for their kindness. However, the most terrifying experience was being chased by a giant hunting dog. One day, I was exploring outside the palace when the giant dog spotted me and started chasing me. The dog's eyes were sharp, and its teeth gleamed menacingly. I ran for my life, but the dog was too fast. My heart pounded, and my legs felt weak. Just then, Glumbleclitch appeared and bravely chased the dog away, bringing me to safety. Her courageous actions deeply moved me. My friendship with Glumbleclitch became a great source of strength for me. She always took care of me and protected me. Living with her, I learned a lot. She taught me the giants' language and culture, and I told her about my world. We shared many stories about our respective worlds, building a deep friendship. Glumbleclitch and I spent a lot of time in the palace library. The library was filled with giant books, and we read together, gaining knowledge. She told me various stories, and I shared my adventures with her. Through our stories, we learned and understood a lot. Sitting by the library window, we often had long conversations. She introduced me to many books, broadening my knowledge. One day, Glumbleclitch gave me a special gift. It was a small necklace. She had made it herself and gave it to me, saying, "This necklace symbolizes your courage. Always remember your bravery when you see it." I was deeply moved by the necklace. It gave me great strength. I kept it with me always, reminding me of my adventures and courage. My friendship with Glumbleclitch went beyond just a protector and the protected. We relied on each other and grew together. She taught me new things, and I showed her my world. We respected each other's differences, building deep trust and friendship. The peaceful days did not last. One day, I was walking alone in the garden. The sun was shining warmly, and the birds were chirping, creating a peaceful scene. I was relaxing in this tranquility when suddenly, a large shadow loomed over me. Looking up, I saw a giant eagle soaring in the sky. The eagle spotted me and swooped down with sharp talons extended. I tried to dodge, but the eagle was too fast. It grabbed me with its talons and soared high into the sky. I struggled desperately to escape, but it was no use. The eagle's grip was strong, and I hung helplessly in the air. The eagle flew high and headed towards the sea. From above, the sea seemed endless, and I felt immense fear. The wind whipped my face, and the eagle's wings flapped loudly in my ears. I struggled more fiercely, but the talons gripped tighter. Then, the eagle reached the sea and dropped me into the water. I plunged into the cold sea, feeling like I was freezing. I began to sink, my vision blurring. But I did not give up. I fought to swim, battling the waves. The sea was rough, but I managed to stay afloat. The water was cold, and I grew weaker. Then, in the distance, I saw a ship approaching. I shouted desperately, "Help! Help!" Struggling in the sea, I was finally rescued by the people on the ship. They were greatly surprised to see me. "Hey, look at this person!" "How did this happen?" a sailor exclaimed, lifting me up. The sailors pulled me aboard, and I was able to escape the cold water. Wrapped in a warm blanket, I gradually regained my composure. After being rescued, the sailors took me to the captain's cabin. The captain was shocked to see me. "Can you explain what happened?" he asked. I began to tell him my story, my experiences on Lilliput Island, my life in the land of giants, and how I was kidnapped by an eagle. The captain and the sailors were deeply moved by my story. It's a long story. Thank you for saving me." I expressed my gratitude to the captain and continued my tale. The captain admired my courage and wisdom, showing me great respect. He offered me warm tea and food, which I gratefully accepted. The sailors were also very interested in my story, eager to hear more. The ship was a large merchant vessel, and the sailors were all kind to me. They asked me about my world and listened eagerly to my stories. I told them about my experiences on Lilliput Island and in the land of giants. They learned a lot from my stories and came to respect me. One day, the captain invited me to join him for dinner. We shared a meal and talked more deeply about my adventures. The captain praised my bravery and wisdom, showing me great respect. I was deeply grateful for his kindness, and our friendship grew stronger. My adventure story ends here, but the experiences I had will remain in my heart forever. The small friends on Lilliput Island, the new friends I made in the land of giants, and all the adventures I went through across the sea have enriched my life greatly. Now, I am ready to return home and share my stories with everyone. On my way home, I reflected on everything I had gone through and thought about my future. I realized that my adventure was not an end, but a new beginning. Now, I can use my experiences to give courage and hope to others. When I arrived home, I told my family and friends about my adventures. They were amazed by my stories and respected me. Through my adventures, I learned a lot, which made me a stronger and wiser person. Now, I am ready to share my experiences and give courage and hope to others. In a way, my real adventure might be just beginning. I decided to write my story in a book, hoping that my adventures would inspire and encourage others. Sitting at my desk, I picked up a pen and wrote on the first page, "Hello." My name is Gulliver. I am a very curious doctor who loves to travel. Let me tell you about the amazing adventures I have experienced.